The day I got fired, I went into my grandma's and learned how to play gin rummy. Meanwhile, my entire family was tearing the city apart looking for me. Why? Because my sister, the family's golden child, and a so-called genius jewelry designer hadn't been able to sketch a single decent design since I'd left. In my last life, it all came crashing down at the National Jewelry Design Competition. Somehow, Sophie always managed to debut designs that matched mine, just a heartbeat before I could. Everyone assumed I was the copycat. My own family stood up and testified against me. The company I worked for, citing moral turpitude and damage to their reputation, fired me on the spot and slapped me with a lawsuit for a staggering sum in damages. My family, seeing me as nothing but a liability, threw me out. Crushed by public shame and the loss of my family, I fell into a deep depression. I was killed in a hit and run, struck by a car driven by one of my sister's obsessed fans. Even as my consciousness faded, the question haunted me. How did Sophie always know? How did she always manage to create my exact designs one step ahead of me? Then I opened my eyes. I was back the day before the National Jewelry Design Competition. Sadie, you feeling confident about the competition? The chatter in the office pulled me back from the dizzying vortex of memory. I looked around, my heart hammering. It was real. I was back. Are you kidding? Sadi snagged Designer of the Year 3 times running, Maria said with a playful nudge. She's got this in the bag. I managed a weak smile. Only I knew what was coming. In my last life, I submitted a design I had poured my soul into for days. On stage in front of everyone, I was branded a fraud. They displayed 2 sketches on the main screen, identical down to the last delicate filigree line. But the timestamp on the other submission was a full day before mine, and the artist was my own sister, Sophie Walker. She stood in the audience, eyes wide and rimmed with red, staring at me with a look of shattered betrayal. She brought a microphone to her lips, voice trembling as it echoed through the auditorium. Sadie, how could you? If you were blocked, I would have helped you find inspiration. But to steal my work, why? I was frozen? That was my design. It had lived on my encrypted laptop unseen by anyone else. Before I could explain, the crowd erupted. Get the plagiarist off the stage. She doesn't deserve to be a designer. A few scattered voices of support were quickly crushed when my own parents took the stage. They held up photos of Sophie supposedly working through the night at her drafting table and spoke of their profound regret. They said they were ashamed of me and announced their intention to sever all ties. After that, it was over. No one believed me. Security escorted me out. My phone was a firestorm of hatred. Back at my apartment, I checked my laptop. No viruses, no spyware, no remote access logs. My computer and physical sketchbooks had been with me at all times. There was no conceivable way the design could have leaked, yet Sophie's was identical. Every idea, every line. It was impossible. Hey, Sadie, Maria's voice cut through my thoughts again. I heard your sister is competing this year too. Family rivalry. Who do you think will take home the top prize? Not long after I started at this firm, Sophie, by some mysterious coincidence, had been hired too. The mention of her name sent a jolt of pure terror through me. My fists clenched so tightly my nails dug into my palms. When Sophie was born, she didn't cry. While the other newborns wailed, she was silent. My mother, convinced it was a bad omen, brought in a spiritualist from the mountains. The moment the old woman entered our house, she didn't look at the baby. She looked at me. She said our fates were crossed, that my life force cast a shadow over my sisters and drained Sophie's vitality. The solution, she claimed, was to send me away. Otherwise, Sophie wouldn't live to see her 25th birthday. From that day on, my parents' only goal was to get rid of me. I must have sensed it. I tried desperately to win them over. To show affection for my new sister, I brought my favorite stuffed bear into her nursery as a peace offering. Her room overflowed with brand new dolls and toys. For a second, when she looked up at me with a wide, innocent smile, I thought she liked me. I was wrong. She shoved over a tower of blocks and immediately burst into tears. My parents rushed in, saw the toppled blocks and the crying infant and me standing there. The first thing I felt was the sharp sting of my mother's palm across my face. My ears rang and I tasted blood. In that moment, I understood Sophie and I could never coexist. Soon after, I was sent to live with my grandmother in the countryside. She raised me, tough but loving, doing it all on her own. 2 years ago, my parents suddenly reappeared, asking me to come home. Starved for their affection, I foolishly agreed. Now sitting at my desk, I stared at my computer and the portfolio of my life's work. Sophie had been a dancer her whole life. When had she ever found time to study art, let alone jewelry design? I asked a colleague to send me Sophie's portfolio submitted to the company. He emailed a file. I clicked through it, my blood running cold. Design after design, identical to mine. Some are private sketches I'd never shown anyone. Projects I'd been saving to open my own studio, and they had been released commercially under her name. How? Hands shaking, I dragged every single design file on my computer into the trash and permanently deleted them. I had to calm down. I had died once already. There had to be a blind spot, something I was missing. I had dedicated my life to this craft. I'd studied art in high school, earned a full scholarship to the Rhode Island School of Design, and specialized in gemology and fabrication. My skills were real. I took a deep breath. Whatever trick she was using, I would beat her. I would create something new. I shut down my computer. I couldn't risk it again. I pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and a pencil. An idea began to form. I sketched, letting my hand move, channeling panic and fury into the lines. Hours melted away. Finally, I leaned back and looked at the finished piece, a ring with a band woven from delicate threads of rose gold culminating in a white gold setting shaped like a violet, its petals cradling a rare deep purple sapphire. Elegant, mysterious, noble. I would call it Violet's Kiss. Suddenly, a gasp came from across the office. Oh my God, Sophie Walker just posted a new design. It's wow, stunning. Phones buzzed. People huddled around. I pulled out mine with trembling thumb and opened Instagram. There it was, a new post from Sophie with the caption, "Working hard to bring more beauty into the world. For all of you, here's a little something I'm calling Violet's Kiss." The image was a perfect digitally rendered version of the exact design I had just finished sketching on paper, my vision flawlessly executed. My breath caught. Someone walked past my desk and snatched the paper from my drafting table. "Hey everyone, get a load of this. It's the same design Sophie just posted. Identical." The office crowded around my desk, murmuring, "She's right." A cold dread washed over me. I stood to grab my sketch back, but someone shoved me. "Sadie Walker, don't tell me you were planning to plagiarize your own sister?" Someone hissed. Whispers turned accusatory. "She looks so prim and proper, but she's just a common thief." Then a voice cut through the noise. "Wait a minute. Haven't you guys noticed? A lot of Sadie's older designs look suspiciously similar to Sophie's." People pulled up our portfolios to compare. I seized the moment and snatched my drawing back. "This is mine," I said, voice shaking with rage. "Sophie is the one who has been stealing from me all this time." It seemed as if on cue. The office door opened and Sophie walked in. She wore a pristine white dress, the picture of innocence. Tears streamed down her cheeks. "Sadie, why are you doing this?" She sobbed. "I know you don't like me, but those designs are my life's work. They're all I have." She turned to the others. "Ever since she came back home, she's resented me. Is this about Mom and Dad? Are you punishing me for them?" Her performance was flawless. Everyone looked at her with pity, then back at me with disgust. Someone shoved me hard. I stumbled, hit the sharp corner of a metal desk, and felt a sickening thud as a warm trickle of blood ran down my temple. Sophie rushed forward, pretending to help. The moment her hand touched my arm, she flung herself backward onto the floor. "Seriously, this girl with all these people watching," she wailed, eyes wide with manufactured fear. The office swarmed around her, asking if she was hurt, while shooting daggers at me. "What is wrong with you, Sadie?" they demanded. "You get caught stealing and now you're assaulting her. Leave her alone, she's not worth it. Let the psycho bleed on the floor." Sophie slowly rose, brushing herself off with a martyred sigh. "It's okay, everyone. She's still my sister no matter what." A dry, humorless laugh escaped me. I looked at her, the master manipulator. "You know what, sis? You're right. I was wrong. Come closer. I have something I want to tell you." Weary but triumphant, Sophie stepped toward me. I smiled sweetly. As soon as she was in range, I slapped her across the face hard. The crack echoed. She stumbled and fell to the floor, more from shock than from the force of the blow. The crack echoed through the office like thunder. For one suspended second, everything froze. The murmurs, the phones held the loft, the fluorescent lights buzzing. Sophie lay on the floor stunned, the white of her dress smeared with dust from the carpet. Her eyes were wide and blank, and for a heartbeat, I was afraid I'd gone too far. Then the flood returned. Screams, shouts, the metallic clatter of chairs, people gathered, a ring of faces that looked like judges on a tribunal. Sophie began to sob again, all theatrics and measured grief. Someone called for security. Someone else called my name like an accusation. I did not wait for the security guards. I stood, palms trembling, and walked out of the office. I left behind the hum of whispers and the quick practice kindness that collapses as soon as the cameras turn away. I left behind my sketch, now crumpled and damp with a smear of my sweat. I left behind the life I had thought was mine. Outside, the city had its usual indifferent rhythm. Taxis hissed, buses sighed, and the sun dropped lazy light over glass and brick. I walked until my legs refused to carry me farther. I stopped at a small cafe and let the noise and the steam of espresso anchor me. I watched my reflection in the window and did not recognize the woman who stared back. The cut on my forehead throbbed where the desk had met bone. Someone tried to hand me a napkin, but I waved them away. I could not afford to be seen right now. Not weak, not unstable, not the woman everyone already believed to be a thief and a liar. The first thing I did after I had stopped shaking enough to think straight was call Grandma. She answered on the first ring, her voice a warm rumble in my ear as steady as an open table. "Come home," she said. "You always know where to find me. Come home for a day or two. Do not do anything foolish." Her voice was a harbor. I told her where I was, and she told me to take the next train. She did not ask for details. She did not demand explanations. She gave me soup and a shelf to sleep on. And later that night, gin rummy lessons at the kitchen table under the yellow lamp that smelled faintly of lemon oil. The game was simple, the cards worn, and in the repetitive click of tiles and the shuffle of paper, something in me began to unknit. Grandma had a way of making the world smaller, of reducing tangled catastrophes to a single table with a teacup and a single circumstance to solve. She told me stories about her hands, how they had mended socks and coaxed life out of stunted tomato plants, and she made me laugh until my ribs ached. But the respite was fragile. The internet was not kind. Photos and headlines marched across my phone like a procession of judgment. People I had once smiled at on the street turned away when I passed. The company had sent a public statement. My parents had posted a carefully curated letter of disappointment. My sister had posted an image of herself at a drafting table, hands flourished with a poised pen and a caption about gratitude and perseverance. The comments were a chorus of support for Sophie and venom for me. One article called me an alleged plagiarist. A forum had already assembled a thread that tried to catalog the evidence against me. The online world had rendered its verdict with the speed of a heartbeat. There was no time to drown. I had been given an impossible, obscene gift the first time around, and I had wasted it. I had been allowed back a single day. Panic trembled just under the surface of my relief at being alive. I could feel the future like a soft fabric that I might either smooth or shred. I decided I would not repeat the same mistakes. Whatever had happened the last time that allowed Sophie to be a step ahead of me, I would find it. I would stop pretending it was magic or fate or just rotten luck. There was a mechanism, a blind spot, and I was going to find it. The first place I looked was the obvious and the ridiculous all at once. Sophie herself. If she had access to my designs, there must be a channel. Friends, fans, a leak, a spy, but the more I thought, the more impossible it seemed. My files had been encrypted, locked with passwords, and two-factor authentication. My sketchbooks were physical, tucked into boxes that had been with me every second of my day. To borrow fearlessly from every paranoid story I had ever read, I considered everything. Maybe Sophie had hired a forger. Maybe she had someone at the firm feeding her information. Maybe she had a fan who broke into my apartment and scanned my paper sketches with a phone camera and then posted them under Sophie's account. Maybe she had a deeper trick. She had learned to anticipate me, to study my hand, my tendencies, to mimic my style such that any new design I perfected would look like her work because she had mirrored me so completely. Grandma listened to my litany of theories, And when I had finished, she reached over and pressed my hand. "You know your work," she told me. "You know your hands. That is a beginning." She gave me a strip of paper and a pencil and asked me to draw the ring again. Not for evidence, but to see how my hand moved when I was calm. I did, and she nodded. "You are not the same frightened bird this time," she observed. "You are sharper." I took that small confidence and began to methodically map the last timeline. I wrote a list, every person who had access to my designs, every place I had or shown my sketches, every password, every backup. I remembered a client meeting at a cafe where I had sketched rough ideas across a napkin. I remembered leaving my bag in the office locker overnight once when I worked late. I remembered a vendor who had photographed one of my pieces for a commission and then lost the storage drive. I followed each memory like a thread. I also reached out not to anyone in my family, not to my managers, but to the people who would stand with me when facts mattered more than theatrics. First, Maria. She was the only person who had ever seen me rage and then later laugh about it. She had been the first colleague to nudge me that morning, the one who had said Sadie is the sure bet. When I told her everything, she was quiet for a long minute. Then she said quietly, "I always thought it was weird. I will help. We are going to be careful," she said. She introduced me to a second ally, a quiet junior designer named Demir, who had an obsession with pattern recognition and an alarming specific talent for code. He had once made a script that could scan thousands of images a minute and flag duplicates. He would be useful. We began small. Demir set up a monitor to watch social feeds and image databases for exact matches to my sketches. He wrote code that compared pixels and vectors rather than metadata because timestamps were easy to spoof. Maria began to compile purchase orders, vendor emails, receipts, anything that could show a paper trail from my design to Sophie's public portfolio. I contacted a security researcher, someone who freelanced in digital forensics. For a fee that tasted bitter, he scanned my laptop and my accounts again and again and produced nothing. No intrusion, no remote access logs. It was the same blank answer that had haunted me the first time. If there had been no digital breach, then perhaps it had been analog. Someone had seen my sketches, or someone had traced my hand. I also started to notice patterns. Sophie always posted about inspiration the moment I finished a piece. Her uploads were timed with the mechanical precision of a clock wound tight. Once I sat back and watched her account like a hawk for 2 days. She would post a morning draft of a flower motif, and then an hour later upload a clean render. The render was always more polished and curated, but the basic idea had been my seed. It was as if somebody in her orbit had an uncanny ability to transduce the rough into the finished article in the blink of a day. We set the track without calling it that. If Sophie or her accomplices were getting my ideas in real time, then the only foolproof method would be to produce a design that could not be interpreted or that would reveal the method by which it was stolen. I decided to make something that lived in process as much as in form. A piece whose essence was not only in lines, but in gestures and in the way I drew it. I sketched not one ring, but a collection of small variations, slight experiments in negative space, and asymmetric filigree that made no sense unless seen as a set. The idea was simple: create a family of sketches that when assembled produced a modular design. Each alone looked incomplete. Put together, they formed the whole. If someone stole one and tried to present it as a finished work, the mismatch would show. The day before the competition, I drafted a cover letter in a protective envelope for my submission and took it to a notary. It felt absurd, merely theatrical, but absurdity was a kind of armor sometimes. The notary stamped and signed, and I felt for the first time since the auditorium a sliver of control. Maria and Demir promised to be at my back. Grandma promised to keep the kettle on and to bake me a pie. I kept my sketchbook close and my mind busy. On my way into the city, I rehearsed what I would say if someone accused me. The old script had been, "I did not steal." This time, I added more lines about demonstration and process. I would propose to show the layers of idea, the iterations, the molten sketches that preceded the work. If any of those had been leaked and then polished into Sophia's portfolio, that leak would exist somewhere. That was my hope. That was my small, stubborn faith. When I arrived at the venue, the air hummed with the same strange electricity as the first time. Designers and patrons drifted like ghosts of possibility. There were models with clipped hair and jewelers with hands stained by solder flux. The judge panel sat beneath bright lights and smoky chandeliers, elevated like an altar. This time, I did not feel like an interloper. I felt like a person with a purpose. Sophie was there, of course, flanked by the same polite clutch of admirers. She wore a black dress that made her look severe and small at the same time, like a statue carved in onyx. Her smile was measured, and she walked with the practiced poise of someone who had rehearsed both grief and triumph. I watched her from across the room and decided my next move. I entered my pieces with the care of a surgeon. I labeled each sheet by hand and slid the submissions into the envelope I had notarized. When I handed it to the clerk, I watched the clerk as I fingers. The way they moved, the casual dance of bureaucracy. The clerk took my envelope and stamped it. I felt like a child who had smuggled a note across perilous waters. When I walked away, I kept my head high. The waiting was the worst part. For hours, the competition moved in a slow succession of exhibits and speeches. The audience clapped at polite jokes. At one point, Sophia's name was called during a panel discussion, and the room hummed approvingly. My stomach tightened, but I held fast. I had prepared my evidence, and my allies were in place. If the theft occurred again, we would have the technical means to find the fingerprint it left. As the finalists were announced, the air thickened. Names rolled like drum beats. My name was not among the first few. My heart sank. Then the MC called a short list, and my name was there. A bright, screaming spot in a gray field. I had made the cut. The auditorium filled with that particular hush that arrives before judgment, the mechanical rustle of programs, and the self-conscious clearing of throats. We filed onto the stage one by one. Sophie was near me, her posture composed. I could not read her face. The judges displayed each design on a large screen. When they showed mine, a hush. When they showed Sophie S., a different hush, warmer and layered with sighs of approval. My stomach twisted. Then it happened. Under the scramble of applause, a mere S code flagged something in the back end. A small, near imperceptible image, a duplicate, had appeared online tied to an obscure freelance render service. The image was a mid-process scan, one of the modular sketches I had submitted that by itself looked like an unfinished fragment. It was time-stamped inexplicably earlier than my official submission, and it was hosted on a server traced to a freelance render account that listed Sophie as a client. That was our hook. I felt the old desperation rise, but I steadied myself. This was not over. It was the beginning of the unpeeling. We had the first thread in a tangled web. The room around me still applauded for other things, oblivious to the quiet little victory. Sophie smiled on stage, and the smile did not reach her eyes. For a moment, I wondered, had she known all along that I had been aware this time? Had she felt the difference in my posture, the new map of my intentions? Or had she simply been complacent, a woman assured by the machinery of sympathy that have always protected her? After the ceremony, while the crowd streamed out to cocktails and compliments, Maria met me near the cloakroom and handed me a phone. Demir had scraped the freelance render services activity and found a trail of accounts that belonged to a ring of small-time digital operators, people who polished rough sketches into glossy renders for a price. One of those accounts had direct contact with an email address that, when traced, funneled to an obscure inbox registered by Sophie's manager. It was not proof yet. It was a lead. But we had a lead, which in a courtroom of human drama is often all a desperate person needs to begin changing a verdict. I walked outside into the night, and the city was a blur of white and amber lights. I called Grandma, and she told me to have soup when I got home and to sleep. Sleep was the enemy of planning, but I was exhausted in the way of someone who had seen 2 deaths and decided to live differently. I sat on a bench near the river and let the cold press against my cheeks. I thought of the way Sophie had been held as a child. The way the spiritualist had focused on me instead, how fate and superstition had rearranged the furniture of our lives. I thought of the woman I had been yesterday, and the woman I was determined to be tomorrow ends not with revelation, but with a line drawn in the sand. I had a paper trail beginning to take shape, allies who could read beneath glossy lies, and a strategy that would not rely on the court of public opinion alone. I would not wait to be exposed a second time. I would follow the trail where it led into servers and inboxes and the small safe rooms of commerce where reputations were manufactured. I would make Sophie and everyone who had used her to silence me answer for the theft of my work, my life, and my dignity. But there was another promise, quieter and no less ferocious. The life I had been given a second time was a chance not just at revenge, but at truth. I would not let the same shadows claim me again. I would not only expose the mechanism of theft, I would rebuild a life that made theft impossible. I would teach others what I had learned about the cruelty of family and the cunning of fame. And when the day came, if the moment ever arrived where I could stand in front of that auditorium and name what had been done, I would do so with every piece of evidence laid out like jewels on velvet. For now, there were emails to trace, a render service to subpoena, and a sister who smiled with the ease of someone who believes she is untouchable. The game was set. I had played gin rummy with Grandma and learned how to hold my breath through long hands and longer nights. The cards were shuffled again. The next move was mine. I did not sleep the night before I ended it. I shuffled cards with Grandma at the kitchen table until the edges bit my fingers, until the rhythm of draw and discard steadied my pulse. In gin rummy, you do not win by hoarding pretty runs. You win by laying down at the right time and by knowing what you refuse to pick up. That was the plan. No stage, no screaming match, no satisfying public crucifixion to feed the crowd. I would lay down what I had, and I would refuse what had ruined me once already. At dawn, I took the train back to the city and walked into the firm like a ghost who had edited her own haunting. Maria met me by the elevators. Her mouth said in a determined line. Demir stood beside her, eyes ring from a night inside a cyclone of code. He handed me a small pouch lined with felt. "The lamp?" he said. Inside was the elegant drafting lamp our department had switched to last quarter. It was thin as a blade and warm as a hand. Demir had opened its spine. Nestled near the hinge, masked beneath a sliver of frosted plastic, was a micro camera and a transmitter. "It streams," Demir said, voice not to the cloud the vendor promised, but to a private bucket paid through 3 shells. One of them belongs to a freelance render firm. The subscriber on that account is not Sophie. It is someone who used the name of a mountain spiritualist as an alias. The routing ends at your family's company. The buyer on the bill is your mother. The floor did not tilt. I did not sway. I simply felt the odd, precise sensation of a puzzle piece clicking into place. I thought of the old woman in her shawl, of her eyes gliding past the bassinet to focus on me, of the pronouncement that I must be sent away or Sophie would not live to see 25. I thought about how a prophecy can be the prettiest way to sanitize a decision you have already made. "I checked your first death too," Amir added quietly, as if speaking something brittle. The hidden drone driver lost his license 6 months later for a DUI. The car was a fleet vehicle leased by a marketing contractor that services your family's brand. I cannot prove intent. I can prove proximity. We will leave that to the lawyers. Maria slipped her hand into mine. "You are not going to die this time," she said. "Not on a street, not on a stage." "I'm not going to kill anyone either," I said, and meant it. We did not go to the competition venue. We went to a smaller room that smelled faintly of carpet cleaner and old secrets, a conference room on the 31st floor of my family's headquarters. The receptionist blinked when I gave my name and then made 3 frantic calls. Within 20 minutes, the room held everyone who needed to see and be seen. My parents with their expensive grief faces, Sophie in a dove gray suit, her makeup dewy and precise, her manager, who was also the family PR man, 2 lawyers who wore sleek watches that believed in their own shine. Grandma sat at the end with a thermos and a paper bag of lemon cookies. Maria and Demir each took a chair near the screen. I did not give a speech. I made a stack of index cards, each with a single word written in ink, and placed them face down like a dealer laying out a game. "Evidence," I said, and Amir mirrored my words on the monitor. He showed the notary stamps on my submission envelope. He showed the metadata trail from the drafting lamp, the micro camera in its hinge that captured my hand as I sketched, the stream that hopped from our office network to the freelance render bucket, and then the gallery of polished images that appeared beneath Sophie's name. He showed the payment chain that began with a shell corporation and looped to my mother. "Pattern," I said, laying down the second card. Maria showed purchase orders for props in Sophie's photo shoots that match my works in progress by 6 hours, 12 hours a day. She showed internal emails from the firm's vendor coordinator that asks the lamp company to confirm the special deployment features for content assurance. She showed the clause in the vendor contract, written in the kind of English that passes for innocent when you squint, that allowed quality improvement monitoring at the work surface and assigned those feeds to brand asset management. People, I said, and the third card went down. On the screen, Amir pulled up a list of accounts tied to the render service. One username was composed of the same 3 syllables the mountain seer had used to introduce herself. He clicked another window and opened old photos of that seer, still from a charity gala 15 years ago. The woman in the photo wore a gown and a PR badge. Her name was the same as the man sitting at the table now, except with an easy vowel swap. The room hushed from theater into courtroom. My mother did not break. She looked at each screen with the unruffled calm of a woman who has paid invoices and told herself a story about love. My father's fingers drummed the table. Sophie stared, then turned her face away as if the light were too harsh. "This is what I will do," I said, putting the 4th card on the table. "I will file a civil complaint for the theft of my work against the company, the render service, and anyone who profited from it. I will submit a complaint to the State Attorney General for deceptive practices. I will seek discovery. You will use your lawyers and your statements and your portraits of a close-knit brand to tell people I am unstable. I lived that once already. It ended with a street in blood and an obituary that called me alleged. I am not in that story anymore." My mother folded her hands. "You want money? I want to pull the camera out of every lamp you have ever placed over the hands of a young designer." I said, "I want to see the ground with the kit we built last night that lets any artist check their tools for eyes. I want an injunction. I want penalties that make your spreadsheets cry." "This is about your sister," my father said, but there was no conviction left in the accusation. "This is about a system you built," I said. "Sophie is the face on a box you manufactured. She is not my judge." Sophie flinched, then lifted her chin. "I did not know," she said, which was both true and not. "They gave me files. They said they were mine. Sometimes I wondered why my lines were cleaner on screen than on paper. They said I was too hard on myself." "You posted Violet's Kiss within an hour of me finishing the last petal?" I said. "You named it what I named it." "Who gave you the name, Sophie?" The tiniest pause. Her manager opened his mouth. Sophie beat him to it. "Your mother," she said so quietly. I might have missed it if I had not been waiting 20 years to hear a sister say something that did not ruin me. She always texts the names. She said it helps the story." My mother did not even look ashamed. She looked relieved. Confessions lighten people even when they do not deserve the air. "I did what was required to save my child," she said calmly. "The seer warned me. You are a shadow on her. If you would not go, if you insisted on returning, then I made a place where her life could thrive without your hand in it. You are strong, Sadie. You survive. She was always delicate. This is how families make hard things bearable." Grandma laughed, a small, incredulous sound that danced at the edges of fury. "I was at that appointment," she said, unscrewing her thermos like she was opening a jar of locusts. "The woman you paid was not a seer. She was your PR person in a shawl. I kept my mouth shut because you were already halfway down the road you wanted. I will not be quiet now. You did not save a child. You built a story, and you fed one daughter to the other to keep it neat." Silence held. Then the manager reached for the stack of cards as if he could reorganize my evidence by rearranging my paper. I covered them with my palm. "Here is the part you did not calculate," I said. "I am not going to give any of you the ending you expect. I am not going to stage a press conference with a trembling voice and a triumphant smile. I am not going to drag Sophie across a public square and make her kneel. That would feed the same machine that almost ended me. I have already filed. The subpoenas will go out this afternoon. The render service is preserved. The lamp vendor has agreed to cooperate in exchange for being named first, but punished least. By the time you call your crisis team, the quality improvement feeds will be a headline that does not need my face." My father sagged in his chair. My mother watched me like she was finally appraising a stone for clarity. Sophie pressed her palms to her eyes. "Then what do you want from us now?" my mother asked. "To be seen as I am." I answered and smiled when the lawyers winced at the unprofitable imprecision of it. "But there is one more thing. The driver who hit me. I do not need to know whether your contractor told him to scare me, and his hands did the rest. I need you to sit down together and write the truth of how this machine works. Not for me, for court, for the artists you poached, for the interns whose lamps watched their hands until they learned to draw like ghosts of themselves. My mother stared at the window where the city stacked itself like facets. She did not answer. She did not have to. The lawyers had already begun to calculate the cost of an early settlement, the burn rate of a scandal, the weight of a daughter who had stopped being a prop. I stood. "Sophie," I said, and she lifted her head. "You can tell the truth now. You can come with me and sit for a deposition that will not be kind, but will be clean. Or you can let them tie your ankles to a brand again. I am not your enemy. I am the mirror you were never allowed to look in." She did not speak to me. She looked at my mother out of habit. My mother gave the smallest shake of her head, the old command disguised as tenderness. Sophie closed her eyes and nodded to me instead. "I will come," she said, voice steady. That was the twist. None of us, least of all me, had predicted. Not an apology, not a reconciliation, but a choice made in the right direction with a trembling hand. The room shivered around the decision. I left without waiting for the next chess move. In the hallway, Maria caught up with me. "You did not ask for damages," she whispered. "Oh, I will take them," I said, and for once the fierceness in my chest felt clean. "But the point is not a check. The point is precedent." We rode down with Grandma in the lobby. She pressed the paper bag into my hands. "You can bring cookies to depositions," she said. "It makes even the worst rooms human." We walked outside into air that smelled like cold metal and distant bread. I did not go to the competition. I did not need a ribbon to make what I had just done feel like a win. Weeks unfolded the way careful work does, not with fireworks, but with signatures and sworn statements, and the slow grind that makes a story true in a place that matters. The lamp bender turned over internal memos with phrases like discreet oversight and frictionless capture. The render service sang to save itself. Emails surfaced in which a PR lead requested names for pieces based on what would trend best and urged my mother to craft captions that sounded humble. The Attorney General's office loved a clean case that touched 3 industries at once. My mother's lawyers tried to build a moat out of language. The facts waded through. Sophie sat for 6 hours and did not break. She said where the files came from. She said who told her what to post and when. She said she had been told since childhood that my presence would kill her, and that every compromise looked like survival. She cried once and asked for a tissue. She did not ask me for forgiveness. I did not offer it. I brought her a glass of water. That was enough. People assumed the end is an explosion. Mine arrived like a door. The court approved a consent decree that required the company to fund an independent registry for designers to notarize works in progress, at no cost to pull surveillance devices from creative tools, to publish an apology that named the mechanism and not just the mistake. The render service shut down. The quietest part, the part that mattered most to me, was a paragraph on page 7 that created a grant named not after me or Sophie or any brand, but after every apprentice who had created under a watchful lamp, on the morning the decree went public. I brewed coffee at Grandma's. The kitchen smelled like lemon oil and victory that did not need to be loud. I took out the sketch of Violet's kiss and looked at it a long time. My hands did not shake. I slid the page into an envelope and wrote a note to myself on the flap. "Do not sell this." Remember why I did not frame the apology my parents' company posted. I did not read the comments. I did not wait for strangers to bless me with their belief. I started a small studio on a 2nd floor above a hardware store. Maria came with me. Demir wrote code. I did not pretend to understand. We hosted Saturday workshops where interns brought their tools and learned how to look for eyes and hinges. Sophie sent a bouquet once with a card that said nothing but the name of a plant and the phone number of a therapist. I smiled and put the flowers in a chip jar. Maybe in another life, we would have learned to be friends. In this one, we were 2 women who had stopped serving the same story. Months later, a young designer from our Saturday workshops brought me a ring. It was not perfect. The band pinched. The stone sat a little crooked like a tooth learning to be in a mouth. It was beautiful because it was hers. She asked what she should call it. "Do not ask me," I said and laughed. "Ask your hands." She looked down at the ring, then up at me. then I will call it mine. We both laughed at the obvious and the holy of that. The world did not tilt. There was no surge of strings. Just a morning, a scar at my hairline that had faded to a pale comma, and a room full of work that could finally be what it said it was. I sometimes think about endings. The one I lived the first time had the cheap satisfaction of spectacle. The one I chose tasted like lemon and ink and long patience. It was not a twist designed to make a crowd gasp. It was the twist of a hand unscrewing a lamp to remove an eye, the quiet revolution of refusing to repeat a role. If someone ever writes a headline about me, I hope it does not say cleared or redeemed or returns triumphant. I hope it says the thing that saved me, the thing I am still trying to be. Designer, no cameras.